So a good principle to remember is don't give people a reason to walk away.
If I could tattoo that on some people, I probably would.
Seriously.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, right? Like, don't give people a reason to walk away. I love that. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Jeff Callahan, founder of Become More Compelling. And today, I am so excited. I have a special guest for you. Her name is Felicia Spahr of howtobeInstantlyIrresistible.com. And it's so awesome to have her on Become More Compelling Radio, the podcast where we glean insights, tactics, and mindsets from social skills and charisma experts. And I serve them to you on a silver platter so that you can improve your own lives when it comes to connecting with your fellow humans. She's everywhere right now. She's been featured on Inc. Magazine, Business Insider, the Huffington Post, I Will Teach You to Be Rich, Kissmetrics, Entrepreneur on Fire, The Good Man Project, Mind Body Green, Life Hacks, Under 30 CEO, and of course, Become More Compelling. She's the author of the book Selling for Success. And in this conversation, we go deep. We talk about the best practices when it comes to crafting an introduction. So if you're at a dinner party, if you're at a networking event, how to go from crafting that introduction to the subtleties of group dynamics, one-on-one conversation, and finally concluding with how do you get contact information if you find a cool human that you want to hang out with later. We cover all that and more, and this is a fantastic conversation. She also has a wonderful free resource for Become More Compelling readers. Don't miss out on that. That is both in the show notes and the podcast description. Without further ado, enjoy. You're going to love this one.
Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
It is going well. I'm so excited to have you on the show for a multitude of reasons. But you are possibly I heard that you were voted the most charismatic person on planet Earth right now. I don't know if that's true. I don't know what studies they used, but it sounds like it checks out to me.
Well, the mark of a charismatic person is that we don't know. I have no idea that I was awarded that, so perfect.
Boom. For those of my readers and people listening that may not know much about you, could you kind of give us the broad strokes of who is Fel?
Yes, absolutely. Well, I am from New York originally, so if anyone hears a strong Long Island accent, I hope that they hear it. And I help people improve their charisma, their social skills, their leadership skills. And I actually came into this from a marketing background. And people started asking me, how do you connect with people? How do you do this? And I didn't understand what I was doing until someone brought it to my attention. So that led me down this path of breaking down the mechanics of what I was doing, building self-confidence, how you create rapport with people, how you get people to be drawn to you. What is that magnetic force? What is actually going on? So that it's not this vague thing that people can't understand. That's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, it's one of those things where people that are especially good at a skill, a lot of times they just don't know that they're good. I've written about a friend of mine who, whenever he walks into a room, it's like he lets off like this magnetic pulse, and you can almost feel it in the people that are watching. And sure enough, like people start to actually literally gravitate towards him. I think he actually has his own gravitational pull.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what was that like for you when you started? Because you went from there's a really good section in a it's a Malcolm Gladwell book. I think it's Blink, where he talks about the locked box. And what was it like for you when you started to get the keys and actually unlock that box and examine your own charisma? And what did you learn along the way?
That's a really great question, because I have read Blink and I have completely forgotten about the locked box concept. So I'm glad that you brought it back to my attention. And to answer your question, it's a very strange experience to have other people describe you a certain way and you don't know why they're describing you that way. So I remember having experiences where people would meet me and within a few seconds would just be like, "You're amazing." And I was like, I know, but but I couldn't understand like the response. It was very strong. And I was like, oh, it's just because I'm me. Like that's how I interpreted that when I was younger. But when people started asking me about it, and it's kind of my job to, like I mentioned, really break it down and understand it, I was like, oh. So I start thinking about my past experiences. I start thinking about my family and how they influenced me. I start thinking about the friends that I had in high school, for example. I also think about the wide range of experience that I've had and the hard situations that I've been through and how that affects my charisma. So it's pretty amazing because I feel like now I'm in this incredible rabbit hole where I'm like, okay, surface level, we're talking about social skills, but really we're talking about life and living life. So it's a very fascinating journey, and I'm still on and always discovering and testing things that I do and see what they work, and of course testing that with clients as well. So it's amazing. It really is.
Yeah, and let me ask you this: how did your family influence your social skills and charisma?
So this is interesting, and I'm glad that we're talking about it because a lot of people think charismatic people have these amazing lives and perfect families and everything's great. So in my experience, my parents divorced when I was really young, and I lived with my mom. And my mom is, I mean, God love her, but she's uptight, she's very high strung, and she definitely is not that good at talking to people. So there's that. And then my dad, whenever I saw my dad, he literally could talk to anyone. And in fact, I was on the phone with him a couple of weeks ago and I was like, Dad, I was like, you're the reason why I feel so confident talking to other people. I just saw you doing it and you did it so well that I never thought for myself that it would be a problem. I just mirrored what he was doing. So, weirdly enough, even though I spent more time with my mom, I felt like I absorbed what my dad was doing more, which is very, I mean, we could talk about that for days, like what's going on there. But I think because of that, I was able to understand what my mom wasn't doing and why she wasn't having those kinds of connections with people that I was having. So you see two sides of the coin where I actually was able to see what didn't work viscerally. I lived with it. And I was also able to see what did work and why and what the implications and the after effects of that was too. So I was like, okay, it pays to be like my dad, for example. It does not pay to be like my mom in certain respects. So that was actually a very valuable experience.
Yeah, and a big takeaway I have from that is that you mentioned watching your dad talk to other people, and that notion of it's okay to talk to other people. It seems like a lot of people are walking around with this fear of just interacting with people in general, and that just like causes a very visceral kind of panic on a very deep level. And
Yeah.
you saw like, hey, it's not a big deal, it's fine.
Exactly. And a great example of that I feel like will resonate with a lot of people listening in terms of how pervasive that fear is. I was at this networking event last week for this website called The Skim. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's great. And it was an event where I had one friend who invited me, and I happened to get there a little bit early, so I didn't know anybody. Now, this is a nightmare for most people because you're like, holy, oh my God, like a group of a huge amount of people, and I know no one. Because when we see those situations, we just see other people talking in groups and we assume that they don't want to talk to us. So how I look at that differently is I'm like, look, I bet I'm not the only one here who doesn't know anyone else. So I'm just going to start talking to the first people that I see. So I started talking to these two people, these two women in front of me, and they looked like they were deep in conversation, which is another barrier we could probably talk about. And I was just like, hey, like, is this the Skim event? I just wanted to say hi and introduce myself. And turns out I actually knew one of the women. But just breaking the ice that way is so valuable because then you're like, oh, I can talk to these groups of people over here and I can talk to these groups of people over here. And the phenomenon is you realize that people who are there only gravitate to people that they know, or they've only gone with people that they know and they don't break out of their groups. So it's important to know that as well, that everyone else is just as afraid as you are.
Yeah, it's a lot like taking a dive into a cold pool where you don't want to go in, you don't want to go in, but after you actually dive in, you get the same temperature as the water, and it's fun to splash around and play.
Exactly, exactly.
Because the notion of like networking and being in that environment with people that you don't know can be Like we said, it can be terrifying. I kind of want to walk my listeners through sort of the nuts and bolts of what they might encounter on a typical night, be it a dinner party, a social event, and see how we could take them from, kind of being that scared person in the corner to someone that can actually, enjoy it and thrive in those situations. So a big
Yeah.
part of that is crafting a great introduction.
So the first thing is that it's really important to consider the context that you're in. How you introduce yourself at a dinner party is very different than how you introduce yourself at a new job or at a networking event. So the first thing to always take into consideration is context. And here's a few examples. How I think about introductions is instead of talking about your role, so if I am in a group of engineers, for example, and I say something like, I'm a charisma coach, they're going to be like, what? So like, what is that? So I have to consider the context. So with them, I might say something more like, oh, I help people improve their social skills or their leadership skills or their communication skills. That's something that they can wrap their heads around and be like, oh, okay, I get it. Like you help people do X. That's easy for me as an outsider to understand. Whereas if you and I were meeting for the first time and I knew a little bit about what you do, I would be like, yeah, I'm a charisma coach. And you would be like, cool, got it. So first thing is consider the context. Make sure you understand who you're going to be around and how well they understand what you even do. Are they familiar with that? Do they need more explanation or a different way of describing it? And the next part of that is typically I like to help people think outside of just saying like, oh, I'm a director of marketing or, oh, I'm a engineer or a software programmer. Simply because in some situations it's more powerful to say, oh, I help companies double revenue or I help us expand into, I don't know, global markets. Now I'm just off the cuff.
I like it.
But it helps people go past the point of, oh, software programmer? Okay, I don't know anything about that. Or, oh, director of marketing? Oh, well, I'm a software programmer, so I hate marketing. So with a lot of people, they take these descriptions that we use of our job and they use it as a way to be like, oh, okay, well, I can't relate to you. Goodbye. Or, oh, you're a director? Goodbye. I don't know what it's like to be a director. So I found it to be really useful to be like, I mentioned before, oh, I help people improve social skills. That's something anyone can be like, oh, okay, cool. What is that? Or how do you do that? And if I were a programmer, I mean, maybe I would say something like, oh, I help our company create video games. Programmers create video games, so that's cool. How cool is that? Now I'm just saying it, that's the coolest thing ever. So now I'm interested. So in terms of if someone was listening and wanted to write this down as an exercise, write down your role, but then write down what do you actually help your company or people do? Or what do you create? What does that actually look like? Something that if no one knew what you do actually was, that they could understand it, that they could even visualize it if they had to.
Yeah, it's almost like an equation. I help X do Y so that Z.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
And I feel like almost anyone should be able to grasp like, okay, I see what you do and who you help and the reason behind it, so that there are a lot of hooks for other people to latch onto.
Exactly. Because imagine a situation where someone has that belief that, oh, I can't relate to someone who's different than me. This is a very pervasive thing. And it completely kills the conversation. But imagine someone knows how to explain what they do, and then that person is suddenly like, whoa, that's so cool. Like, what is that? Or how do you do that? And then you can be like, well, I'm a programmer, so I make those video games. Or I'm an engineer, so I make those bridges or whatever. Suddenly it becomes so much easier to talk about.
Right. And I feel like there's a lot of, I think the big mistake people make is they jump right into the jargon, like on line one, and people's eyes across the world or across, a bunch of cocktail parties across the world are glazing over because they're like, I don't know what that is. Anna what? I don't care. And then they just move on.
Exactly. So a good principle to remember is don't give people a reason to walk away.
You know what?
them interested.
If I could tattoo that on some people, I probably would.
Seriously.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's about, right? Like, don't give
Right.
people a reason to walk away. I love that.
Yeah. It's a tweetable right there.
That is a tweetable. So hashtag please don't walk away from awkward people or something. I don't know.
I know, we were almost there. We'll work on the hashtag.
Yeah.
We need some refining.
I'll get my team on that right away. And my team is the cat that largely ignores me. So
I bet she can come up with something.
yeah, she's trying to figure it out, which is code for she's asleep.
Yeah.
So we're at that dinner party. We've crafted that great introduction. We've got those people hooked. Say that there's, a small group for, like, I consider a group 3 people, obviously, because 2 people is not a group. Math skills. So 3 plus people, 3 to 5 people. You're going to focus on things in a group conversation. You're going to approach that group conversation in a much different way than you're going to approach one-to-one conversation. We've got our test subject, and he's got that great introduction, and now he's kind of wading into the waters of the group conversation. What are the right things to focus on? What's going to be, the right mindset to approach that group with?
Yeah, that's another great question. I actually was on a call with someone the other day who asked a very similar question. And I'll go back to what I said before, in that the first part of this is we have to look at the context. So many people conflate one-on-one conversations with group conversations, and they have the same expectations. So someone who typically says, "Oh, I'm great at one-on-one, but not a group," is really saying, I want the same thing from group conversations that I get from one-on-one. One-on-one is usually just a great environment for deeper connection, for going into more intimate personal details with someone. You're like having this mutual discovery process, and you're developing trust. So when you trust someone, you talk about different things. Versus a group, things are a little bit more wild. Like, we're in the wild, wild west when we're in groups, because we might like, let's say you and I, we know each other well, and then there's 2 other people in the group. So I trust you, but I don't trust, like, Bob yet. So
no one trusts Bob.
No one trusts Bob, number one. But so that changes everything, because what I would normally say to you, I now can't say in front of the group because it's different. I'm like, oh, I don't have that rapport yet. It might be weird if I say something that I would just say to you alone. So again, we have to look at the context and know that groups by nature are more random. They're a little bit more wild. And you know what? The purpose of a great group conversation is usually like to have fun. Like, people in groups at parties, they just want to have fun. They want that like rapid fire, like, hey, like, we're talking about fun things. We're like kind of getting to know each other. But that's the point of it. You don't have to go any deeper than that in a group.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I was just going to say that's spot on. And I love that thought of people confusing one-on-one objectives and goals with group objectives and goals, because just by their very nature, they are going to be different. And I think people who can really key in on that fact, they're already going to be achieving more success just by knowing that.
Absolutely. And another good thing to remember in terms of getting really specific about what to talk about in those group situations is, if the group objective is to be fun, a little bit wild, a little bit random, then I would come into that group conversation being able to talk about fun, interesting things, which may mean current news, maybe like a recent activity or something interesting that I read, like an article, something that is like light enough fodder for interesting conversation, but not so deep philosophical or intimate that it would be really weird to bring it up with people that I didn't know.
Yeah. So an ounce of preparation can go a long way. And maybe don't get on the blogs that are like, talking about the death penalty and like crazy stuff that no one should ever talk about in group conversation. Keep it light, keep it fun, because most people, probably excluding me and you, kind of find their lives, mildly depressing, especially if they're not in a job that they like or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Lift them out of that, because if you don't, if you're talking about heavy stuff too early, you've just given them a reason to walk away.
Yeah, that's like, okay, that's our theme right now.
I
Don't give
like
a
it.
reason to walk away.
I kind of feel like a game show host, like a reason to, and the crowd goes, walk away.
Yeah. Oh my God, that'd be a great show. That's such a good point you made, though, where like you wouldn't go into a conversation being like, "Hey, so you hear what happened with ISIS?" It's like,
Oh,
oh my
oh,
God.
no. I'll be running the other direction and looking for a window to jump out.
Seriously, oh my God, it's the worst thing to talk about.
And it's funny. You just remind me. On my last podcast, I was talking with Sean McKibben of SimpleFellow.com, and one thing that we talked about was stop words and how
Mm,
they stop things because they're called stop words. And I wrote a post on. There was a friend of ours who, whenever we would go out, he would constantly disagree with everything that we said, and
mm.
just it was a chore. It was awful.
It does
So
sound awful.
if you like the game that me and Sean played was the yes and game, and it was
Mm-hmm.
basically. And what's funny is if you go back and listen to the podcast, we're subtly doing it the entire time before we even knew what it was. We were saying like
That's
yes,
amazing.
and we were continuing that conversation. So I feel like in that group, it applies to one-on-one, but it also implies in groups. If you can use those like yes, and I think blah 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 blah, and
Right.
get all the stoplights to green instead of trying to like hold people up with yellow lights or red lights.
Absolutely. And wait, what are stop words? I
So
should probably know these.
stop words would be like no, like if you said something and I started out my next thing with no
Mm,
or but. Now, and what's crazy, and this is like a social dynamics just weird thing is, even if I was agreeing with you and I go no, I totally agree, that still feels like a stop word. Even though
yeah.
what I say next is I agree with you, it still is halting that conversation instead of saying like yes and blah 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 blah. Even if I was disagreeing with you, if I say yes and I actually think the opposite, like that would still feel less harsh than agreeing with someone but using one of those stop words.
Right. Oh, that's such a good point. That actually reminds me of if anyone's read the charisma myth,
Hmm.
Olivia talks about how when people say no problem or
Mm.
no worries, that it actually has the opposite effect, where like you just see the word problem and worries because our mind isn't differentiating between the no. Like it's just like, okay, we still see problem. So that's actually something that I've implemented where I don't say no problem or no worries anymore. I'm like, great, sounds good.
And like I'm sweating over here because those are two words that I use too much. And
Oh yeah, that's how I was too. I was like, no worries, of course.
and,
But I'm
and
like, you know what? I'm gonna
the
change that.
all the other people are just thinking like problems and worries. And
Yeah.
so now that I know about it, I'm immediately going to go from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence for a while, and I'm gonna play with that and see how that feels to me. But from now on,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be purging that from my diction and my vocabulary.
It makes a huge difference. I don't even know how anyone's receiving it, but I actually feel better, weirdly. I'm like, oh, we got this on lock. We're good. There is no problem.
Nice, and you're lifting up the rug to like the secret level of social skills and charisma. Yes, it matters a lot. We're talking about external like group dynamics and all that stuff, which is great and it's necessary. But I find like if you get to the level where you're making yourself feel comfortable, going back to the charisma myth, Olivia Fox talks about making yourself comfortable in situations. And to me,
Yeah.
that's like the deepest. That's one of the deeper levels of charisma. Is that when you start doing things to make yourself more comfortable, everyone else around you is going to feel that on some level, and they are going to respond to you much differently. Could you speak of
Exactly.
that? Do you have any experience in that realm? I'm sure you do.
Oh my goodness. So much. So much. Where do we even start? Okay, here's where I'll start. Like you said before, your friend who walks into the room and has that magnetic pulse. I think that's so important to highlight as it relates to this because social skills is an interesting thing to talk about because everyone always asks, what do I say? What do I do? How do I create that emotional connection? How do I do XYZ? Where everything really stems, the root of everything is like you said, it's how you feel about yourself. And that can get so misinterpreted, especially in a hyped up personal development, positivity kind of world where we're like, oh, well, duh. But it's like, well, do you actually feel comfortable? Because I know people that say all the right things, but they're emanating a different vibe or energy, if you will, where I can tell that they're uncomfortable, or I can tell that they're being awkward or they're being weird. So what they're saying doesn't matter anymore. I'm just like, okay, you're giving me like just a different sense here, and it's not matching with what you're saying. So now you're incongruous, and now you're inauthentic, and now you're fucked.
And it's like, are you gonna rob me? Like, when you get that vibe and you're like, okay, what's going on? This is making me very uncomfortable, and I don't know why. Obviously, that's not a good state to be in if you're trying to be charismatic, and if you're trying to, just be it deeper conversations with people, be it getting a mate, whatever it might be, get a promotion. You better be lined up. You better have that stuff, as you say, on lock.
On lock, absolutely. But it's also, of course, I just want to say, like, this is really easy to talk about and highlight, and it's probably one of the most difficult aspects of real charisma, where you have to go deep in yourself, and you have to be introspective, and you have to work on it. And sometimes it's really painful. So no surprise to me that it's easy to be like, oh, that feels painful, so I'm not going to do that, where that's exactly what you need to do.
Sometimes the most painful things are exactly what we need.
Absolutely.
But we ignore them because, newsflash, humans don't like pain.
I know. I've actually been implementing a very interesting thing in my life, and I call it a pain practice, because I wanted to actually cultivate a healthier relationship with pain. So I know it's going to sound weird, but I wanted to feel like I wasn't always seeking comfort. Like, that's our natural way of being. But I wanted to not only like be able to go through pain or challenges, but I wanted to love it. I wanted to be in situations where I was like, yes, I'm feeling pain. And how this relates to social skills when you're trying to improve this, when you're in conversations and you have those thoughts where it's like, oh, I don't know what to say. Or, oh, did I see something weird? Oh, what happened? So usually what happens is we have this downward spiral in the moment where we're like, oh my God. And we start freaking out and we get paralyzed and we freeze up. But if you love the challenge of that, where it's like, oh, I don't know what to say. Okay, well, let's refocus on the conversation and that detail that they just mentioned. I can latch onto that. I can lead the conversation in that direction. That changes everything, because now you're not afraid of not knowing what to say. You're like, I love it. Cool. It happened. And now I can keep moving forward.
What kind of things have you been trying? Like, an example of this pain practice. Is it like, I couldn't let this go because like, I'm wondering, like, laying down in a Starbucks and doing a snow angel a la Tim Ferriss or what?
I'm going to sound like a masochist, but whatever. So I taught myself to write with my left hand, for example, which is extremely painful. In fact, I don't know how I wrote with my right hand as a kid, because writing with my left hand is just agonizing, where your hand is just throbbing, and this is not tied into a bigger goal. So one could say like it's a waste of time, but I started doing it when I was journaling in the morning. So if I can do this and like pain is like a weird relief in some way, it's like, what else can I do? So I've been doing things that I normally would not have done before. I take like cold showers, which sounds awful to anyone listening, and it sounded to me, but like there's this pain aspect to it where I'm like, this makes me feel alive. So when you think about charisma and being someone that people want to be around, if I feel alive, you bet your ass you're going to feel alive around me. You're going to be like, whoa, like what's going on? This like woman has this crazy energy. There's something about like something going on within her that I can't even explain, which is that pulse, which is that thing that cannot be solved with just a line or a certain way of saying something.
Yeah, it's like people are looking at you and they're thinking, I bet she takes cold showers and I bet she writes with her left hand, even though she's right-handed.
I bet they're not thinking those exact things, but they feel like I'm alive. I feel pain, and pain means I'm alive. I don't just feel happy or secure or comfortable all the time. I also feel these other, maybe one would say darker emotions, but that's part of being a person. That's part of being human, and that's attractive. It emanates from you.
Yeah, like there's a lot of because we're in similar fields in that we both talk about social skills and charisma. We both have businesses around that subject, and there's a fair amount of imposter syndrome that you have to overcome to do what we do. And I mean, I would argue to do what
Totally.
anyone
My
does,
God,
but
yeah.
especially being more of a public figure as we are, the kind of fire that you go through can take you to some really dark places, and you're just thinking like, I'm not good enough, what am I even doing? But all that is like eviscerated in the glow of publishing a new post or getting a guest post or whatever it might be, publishing a podcast, and
Yeah.
that like the heights far outweigh all the negatives, even though when you're in the middle of the valley, so to speak, the negatives feel so bad, but the elation feels like you're on top of Mount Everest.
Absolutely. I mean, I can definitely speak to that where there was a time where I was like, I wish no one had ever asked me these questions, because now I started to feel like I had this performance anxiety where I'd be in conversation and you talk about what you do, and then everyone just starts looking at you a little bit more closely, and they're like, all right, well, is she that socially skilled? Like, is she charismatic? I'm like, oh my God, this is really stressful. Like, because I feel like there are moments when I'm not charismatic all the time. And I turn all that stuff off because I just want to, like, hang out and be boring for a second. So I definitely experienced that. And it was really uncomfortable. But with this practice that I've been having of like welcoming that, I find that I don't feel that way anymore, which is very strange. Where like I could feel a little bit. I feel that anxiety where I'm like, oh, people are going to be watching me and they're going to be making sure I'm charismatic. And then I'm like, cool, welcome. I'm ready.
Yeah, and it's
I'm
so
going to the ring.
it's so irrational because you think like, okay, if they see I'm not charismatic, they're gonna call the charisma police. I know it, and then they're gonna take me to the charisma jail or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and it's totally
Which sounds like
irrational.
a great place,
It
to
does.
be
Like
honest.
everyone's like they're behind bars. It's like Orange is the New Black, except really, really charismatic. Uh, yes.
I'm just like imagining a charismatic jail. It just sounds like a lot of fun.
So, and I can really identify with that moment of like I'm picturing like you're at a conference and I mean you are going to be on. You are going to be charismatic. What
Yeah.
is that shift like for you? Maybe you're up in your hotel room getting ready. Like for me, it's always like as I take the elevator down, and then like I almost like feel myself change in a way because and I need to be more introspective about this and figure out exactly what I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
to get me into that state. But have you examined that part of yourself? Like when you know you're going to be on, maybe it's an event, maybe it's a networking event. Well, what what is happening in that process going from like normal Phil, which is still pretty awesome, to like
Yeah.
superpower charisma, Captain Charisma Phil.
Captain Charisma. Well, there are a couple of things. And when I started to break this down for myself and understand what exactly I was doing, I always did a certain activity beforehand. So I'll explain different ways that this looks because it's different for me every time. So sometimes before I go to an event, for example, I think about how I want to feel. So not only if I want to feel charismatic, but maybe I also want to feel really energetic. Maybe I also want to feel funny. So I'll watch a little bit of comedy before I go out to like get that rolling in my head, get those gears going. So I just start feeling funny. I might not crack a joke. I mean, I'm a terrible joke teller, first of all, but I have that energy, and that's what I want. So that's one aspect of it. Other times, I might want to have a more relaxing pre-ritual, if you will. So I think about this in terms of all the things I've read about athletes, where before they go into a performance or they swim or play basketball, they have these rituals that they do. So I became fascinated with that and started thinking, okay, what can my ritual be? So sometimes if I want to feel really relaxed, like say last week I had a speaking engagement and I just wanted to feel like relaxed. I almost wanted to glide into it. That's how I was feeling that day. So I was listening to like really emo, like mopey kind of music, but that I really like. And it just made me feel happy. It reminded me of certain memories that I've had, and I just felt very at ease. And I was like, cool, that's the feeling that I want, and I'm ready to go. So I think in terms of actually applying that, it's helpful to think about how you want to feel and what activities or things you can do to help you feel that way, so that when you're actually at the main event, you don't feel like, oh, I want to feel that way, so now I need to like turn it on. It's like, well, what do I do? That's just a lot to think about. But if you feel that way beforehand, then it naturally flows into wherever you're going.
Right.
So yeah.
You have a lot of control over that before the event. When you're at the event, then 3 minutes goes by, you still haven't talked to someone, and I mean, we talk about that spiral. Then I mean,
Yeah.
you could get in that state, but it's very unlikely. Why not do the things beforehand that are the most likely things to get you into that state?
Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of music as well. I definitely use music to reinforce and elicit emotions. Where if I know I need to feel a certain way, I'll put on a song that makes me feel that way, and then I guess I do a little breathing as well. And then that's all on the elevator ride down, and then boom, when the doors open, I am Captain Charisma or whatever superhero you want to
Yeah.
throw in there.
Absolutely. I was just going to say another good thing to think about that might be helpful for people listening is, let's just say that you don't have a ritual right now, or you don't have a thing you can do. A great way to warm up before a social interaction is to have a social interaction. So that could mean having a phone conversation with a friend or even your parent. It could mean like talking to someone in that elevator if that's where you are at that particular moment, or even just quick small talk with your barista. Like, hey, how's it going? Having a good morning, whatever. That is such a great way to warm up so that you don't feel like, oh, wait, how do I talk to people? It's like, oh, I just did it. So let's just go do that again.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say it, because there's a concept I teach called conversational muscle memory, and it's exactly that, where if you're at the main event and you haven't talked to anyone all day, good luck. But if you've been talking and you've had dozens of small conversations throughout the day, I mean, it's going to be easy because that's something that you've already been doing all day, and it's going to be a simple process to just open your mouth and start speaking again, because guess what? That's who you are today, and that's what you've been doing. I love it.
Exactly.
So I do want to I wanted to pick your brain on, like, if we transport ourselves back to like our imaginary friend who we're kind of coaching. We've done the introduction with them. They're in that group conversation. They've been in the group conversation for a while, and people are kind of starting to branch off. And when it comes to that one-on-one conversation, how can they, build that rapport and make sure that one-on-one conversation is a fantastic experience for both people?
Another really good question. So let's say, again, like you said, someone's coming out of the group conversation where things are fun and light and butterflies. And we go into one-on-one, and an essential ingredient of a great one-on-one conversation is that you are curious about the other person. And I mean genuinely curious. So just to make a quick differentiation, a lot of people go into conversation with expectations, with things that they want to get out of it, whether those are tangible or intangible. And they say things that they think are the things that they should say without paying attention to what is happening in the moment. So I'll paint the picture of what this looks like. Let's say you and I are having a one-on-one conversation. I'm just like, hey, like making our introductions. Who do you know here? How'd you get here? Etc. And let's say you throw out a personal detail, like what's a personal detail that you would say, and like if we were just getting to know each other.
So this is going to sound awful, but so for Christmas last year, I told my wife, when I'm rich and famous, I want a a painting of our cat done where the cat is wearing like regal military gear. And and lo and behold, she got that for me for Christmas last year, and it actually made the front page of Reddit in
Really?
2014. Yeah, it did
Oh my
on
God,
Christmas
that's
Eve.
amazing.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay.
So weird
So,
cat person personal detail.
okay. So there's actually so many different avenues that I could take this conversation. But let's say I want to go real deep. So I might say, oh, that's so funny. How long have you and your wife been married? Or how did you guys meet? I
We
might say something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been married for a year, a year and a few months. We actually got married in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Wow. Why Alaska?
We wanted to do a destination wedding and a little bit of an
Hmm.
elopement as well, and so we jetted up there, and it was an awesome experience. We got married at the Museum of the North, and we got to see the Northern Lights.
Oh my God, that's amazing. And so you guys eloped?
Our families knew we were getting married, but we didn't want to have to plan a huge ceremony and all that. So we just wanted to have something pretty small.
Oh, you guys just like snuck off. I love that.
We did.
So I'll stop like the role play for a second. Like what I would take from that is I would start talking about my experience with my wedding that I'm planning and like how we thought about like eloping because we didn't want to go through planning the ceremony and all of the other stuff that goes along with weddings, and we probably could have gone down a big rabbit hole together there. But the main concept there is I'm interested. Like I'm really interested. Like why elopement? Why Alaska? So instead of asking like what questions or just being like, oh, that's cool, and then trying to find another beginning of a conversation, there's so much there that I can ask about. There's so much underneath that you're not telling me, and like I want to know. So whenever I teach this, I call it the childlike wonder technique, where you literally look at someone like they're new. You don't know anything about them, and making assumptions that you do is silly. And it blocks connection. Like when we were talking about before, when you make those snap judgments about people, whether it's about their role, their job, what they look like, you lose. Because guess what? People know when you're judging them and it comes off weird. So being a child, it opens up so much opportunity. I could talk to you for hours. Like, why? What? That's interesting. I'm going through that too. And I thought about this. And you're like, yeah, that's how we thought about it. And this about relationships. Like, we can just go down that forever. So the first aspect, like I said, curiosity. But also, the essence of a great conversation is that two people are tangoing together. So if one person wants to tango and the other doesn't, you can't really force that. So that's important to pay attention to, because we both need to be able and willing to talk about deeper things together one-on-one. When we talk about the why questions, we start talking about our beliefs, our philosophies, how we live life. Those are deep things, and that is what gets you really connected with someone, because you're like, do we have the same values and beliefs? And if we do, ooh, like I want to hang out with you. And if we don't, still cool. What kind of other things can we relate on? Or let's talk about that. I like, yes, and I disagree, but that can also be a great conversation as well.
Right, and it's so key because this theme of curiosity has come up with a few of my podcast guests, and it's, I feel like the more curious you are, like the more you can relate to anyone. Like your net, so to speak, grows so big that even if the person you're talking to, you guys really don't have a whole lot in common, you can still be curious about the thought process behind their decisions. There are so many things that you can just exercise that curiosity, and boom, guess what? You just unlocked the skill to have a fantastic conversation with borderline anyone on planet Earth.
Absolutely. And like when people tell me, like, oh, they started talking about like this stuff they don't know anything about, I'm like, that's not a good excuse. It's just not. I was like, you literally, curiosity is a skill. And it starts with looking at what you're seeing in a different way. Instead of just taking it at face value or just seeing it, you're like, why? Why is that I'm looking at like my lilies now. I'm like, oh my God, why are these lilies so like pink and beautiful? I don't understand them. Like, it's so interesting to me. And that seems like a small thing, but when you start to integrate that into how you live, you naturally start to see people that way as well. So like with you, I'm like, oh my God, I still have more questions about your Alaskan wedding. Like, I'm very interested in that. So like you said, that does unlock your ability to really connect with and talk to anyone.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And one more detail about my Alaskan wedding.
Yes.
There, we had a wedding photographer who actually had to be a witness at our wedding and sign. But she got a picture of us next to this like 12-foot like stuffed bear in the lobby of the
Ooh.
museum, and so me and my wife both made like angry bear faces at the bear, and
That's awesome.
that's one of our official photos. But
That's
yeah,
so cool. Oh, you have to show me that.
yeah, I'll have to include it in the blog post. It's pretty awesome, and a big reason
Oh,
why I
that's
did that
amazing.
actually because, and you'll find this out when you go through the whole 9 yards with your wedding is do some of those silly pictures to start off the wedding picture section, because that kind of breaks the ice and makes everything a little bit more easy.
Right.
And that was
That's
my
such a good
sneaky reason
idea.
for doing it, which I don't think I've told anyone that except for all of my close
Ooh.
friends on the podcast. So shh.
Oh, perfect. We have an inner circle going on here.
Yes, we do. We've talked about some amazing things. To kind of, I guess, tie a nice little neat bow on it. Say, like, the night's going well. You've done the introduction. You've mastered group conversation. You've had that amazing one-on-one conversation. And you realize, like, hey, this person's really cool. How would you go about exchanging contact information to actually see them again and gain a +1 friend?
Great question. So, again, I will first say that one should adjust their expectations going into things like this. Where if you simply go out to meet people and it's always like, okay, how am I going to get their contact info or how am I going to make them my friend? Like, you've already lost.
Yes.
So that's why it's so important to not skip these steps in the process, where you getting really good at, say, one-on-one conversation is crucial, because you develop rapport, you develop trust, and then when you ask, which I'll get into the details, but when you ask for that contact info, it's like, duh, like this is where this was going, and there's no question about it. And same thing in groups. Sometimes groups collectively decide to do things together or get together again, but that's only after talking for like at least 20, 30 minutes. And that's saying that everyone's really socially skilled and has developed a certain amount of trust and rapport. So that's the first thing I'm going to say.
Right.
But again, let's say that's all good and dandy. And I'll just give an example. 2 years ago, I had moved to San Francisco, so I had to recreate my friend group all over again, which I've done many times now. And something that I've learned is when you have developed that trust and rapport and the two of you have talked about certain activities or things that you both really like, that is a absolutely brilliant opportunity for you to exchange contact information. So here's an example. I met this girl at a bar. Now I sound like a pickup artist. But I met this girl at a bar, and she was actually a friend of my fiance's coworker. And I really liked her. We just started talking, we were having a good time, and we somehow mentioned the San Francisco Symphony. Like, it kept coming up, and I was like, I really want to go. It just sounds like fun. She was like, yeah, I want to do that too. And so I was like, let's go together. Like, let's do that. She was like, yeah. So I was like, okay, cool. Let me get your number. And that was it. Like, an important aspect of getting someone's contact info is that you're also not weird about it. You're not like, okay, so next week, 8:00, like I'll pick you up. No. Like, you don't have to do that.
And I'll take you to the woods, and only one of us will be walking back.
Yeah, exactly. So the essence of it is to simply connect on that mutual activity or that thing that's so like low key and like duh. Like, I'd love to do that. Go get drinks at that place, or go on a hike together, or go to the symphony. Yeah. It's still casual, by the way. Like, we haven't made these like solid plans. It's like, yeah, let's do that. And so when you actually get that person's contact info, you're just like, hey, let me just get your number. Get their number. And then maybe a couple of days later, you can text them and say, hey, like, had a great time with you last night. And are you free next weekend? Like, I looked up tickets for the symphony or whatever. With this particular friend, the hilarious part is that we still haven't seen the symphony together. We actually just started off. I was like, hey, like, let's go get drinks. Let's get dinner first. So that's how that started.
My biggest takeaway is having that like duh moment where, of course, it's just a next logical step in meeting someone is getting that contact information. And what kind of smooths everything out is having the activity, having a reason to get it. Because think about, how awkward it would be if you're just like, hey, can I get your number? And then that's it. Like,
yeah,
no,
it's like,
that's,
for what?
Oh, sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But having a reason makes everything so much smoother, and it's how really socially skilled people operate.
Exactly. And another important thing to mention is, in terms of having that reason or that purpose, what tends to happen, because I know sometimes people have gone through this, but then they end it by saying, let's hang out sometime. And then that's it. And it's like, okay, well, we don't, like, what are we going to do? And people get frustrated that nothing happens or nothing comes out of it. And it's like, well, let's look at the process. If things aren't specific enough, or you haven't connected on that activity that you both would actually enjoy, then there's really no incentive from either side to text or follow up and be like, hey, like, I really like love talking to you. Let's get together, etc.
Yeah. Be specific. Have it's a weird dance because, yes, you want to be specific, but not like 8 o'clock.
But not a weirdo.
Sundown underneath the bridge. Like, you don't want to be that specific. So you have a amazing resource for Become More Compelling Readers that I am super stoked to give people the link to. And it's actually an audio program.
So when your readers, your listeners sign up for my email list, I have this free audio class that I call 3 Magic Hooks to connect with anyone that you meet. And it's a very easy, actionable process that you can apply today to start practicing these kinds of conversations that we talked about, where it's not at such an overwhelming level where it's like, oh, I need to create or have the best conversations in the world, but actually just getting really comfortable with small talk and seeing where that goes. And I've had people email me so many times that it helped them really get to know someone. It really helped them open up. It really helped them just simply get more comfortable. So I think your listeners will really love listening to the class and applying that as soon as they're done listening.
Awesome. And that link will be in the, it'll be both in the podcast description and the show notes on my blog as well. So that sounds awesome. Thank you so much for that resource.
Of course.
I may sign up myself just to get a little bit more Fel in my life.
We'll taste.
We'll taste. So Fel, thank you so much for being on, and it was a pleasure. We're gonna have to do it again because like this hour has flown by. It felt like about 2 minutes.
It absolutely has, and I have so many more questions for you, so I can't wait.